Hey guys, welcome to the software engineering channel. So over the past couple of weeks, I've been saddled with the responsibility of building a solution that is able to process card transaction. And as the usual backend engineer, I felt this was going to be writing my comfortable RESTful APIs as usual, until we were slammed with the documentation that looked like Greek and Hebrew. I was expecting to see my normal request and response, but I was seeing things like data elements, seeing things like gibberish, and it was then I knew that there was a problem. There was something I do not know, and this had to do with ISO 8583. It happened to be that when it comes to card transaction, the protocol that is being spoken is different from the normal HTTP stuff that we do. In this case, every system that is tied together actually speaks same protocol, which is ISO 8583. Searched all over online to find resource that could help me out, but I quickly discovered that I was on my own. So I decided that immediately I got a hang of it, I was going to make this particular video series that is able to take anyone who was in my shoes, from the theoretical aspect, understanding the nitty-gritty of the components, down to the implementation details, where you are actually able to receive requests, build up your servers, receive requests, which is made up of ISO messages, interpret the request, fulfill whatever the request needs you to do, and send back your response using ISO message as well. So it's just all about ISO 8583 for financial transaction. If you're a back-end engineer, if you're a software engineer at all, I think this is a good knowledge to have. How about we dive right in, guys? All right, so in this introductory section, we are going to be giving a background explanation of what ISO 8583 is, and we are also going to be talking about the three major institutions that determines the success of your card transaction or the failure of your card transaction, as the case may be. So let's say, for example, I'll just use a particular scenario to just explain the whole thing. So let's say, for example, you wanted to make a withdrawal at a particular ATM, right? The reason why you would eventually get cash disbursed to you, or say, for example, you want to use your MasterCard to make payment at a particular grocery store, the reason why the transaction is going to be successful was because a number of components, your data had to travel between a number of institutions, right? And that was why you could eventually get the cash or make your successful payment, as the case may be. Now, all of these institutions are able to understand one another because they basically speak the same language. And that's what we mean when we say protocol, right? They speak the same language. And that language they speak is what we call ISO 8583, right? The same way you have a number of microservices, right, speaking to themselves using RESTful APIs, HTTP protocol, right? That's the same way each of these institutions are able to speak to one another, basically passing information across, doing authentication and authorization using this particular protocol. All right. Now, these three institutions are the institutions that I said previously that are responsible for determining the success of your transaction or the failure of your transaction, right? And these three institutions includes, number one, we have the issuer bank. We have the issuer bank. Number two, we have the acquirer bank. The acquirer bank. And number 3, we have the credit card network. Credit card network. Now, these are the 3 major institutions, right, in each of these circles that are responsible for the success or the failure of your card transaction, right? And the way each of these institutions communicates with one another, the way they communicate with one another is by using this particular protocol called ISO 8583. So if you want to give it a formal definition, ISO 8583 is just basically a messaging protocol that is used for card related financial transaction. It is a standard actually. ISO itself is a standard that is used for that is used for card related financial transaction. 8583 being a type of that standard. There are also other types. I think there are 2000 and something, I can't remember. But 8583 is the one I can remember now, since that's what we're dealing with. All right, so let's have a look. Let's have a deep look. Let's zoom in into each of these components so we can have an understanding of their parts, what parts they play in making sure that every card transaction can be successful. So let's talk about the first institution, which is the issuer bank. Now, the issuer bank is basically known as the consumer's bank. Consumer's bank. So, in other words, it is basically the banks that issues the debit card or the credit card that the consumer wants to use to make any form of card transaction, right? So if this particular guy is going to this supermarket to pay for some grocery item, the card is going to be issuing out to make that payment, right, was given to him by his own bank. Now that bank is what is known as the issuer bank, right? Now this bank has some activities. They have some responsibilities, and part of their responsibility is actually authorization process. Authorization process. There are a number of things that this particular issuer bank has to vet when this customer is trying to use the card issued to him to make a particular transaction. Now, which is basically obvious, right? The issuer bank has to vet that this customer has sufficient fund. Number one, it has to vet that the customer has sufficient fund in his account, right? Because this card is basically just an item to make withdrawal out of a particular account that is residing within the issuer's bank, which is the customer's account, right? So the issuer bank, within that process of communication, the issuer bank is responsible for vetting that the customer has sufficient fund that is enough to make the particular payment that he wants to make. All right. Number two, the issuer bank has to also vet that this customer is truly the rightful owner of the card that he's trying to use to make payments, right? Which is basically just, we can just say authentication of card. Authentication of card. And that's why you basically might not be able to take somebody's card except if you are giving the security information, which is the PIN, right? Which is the PIN, right? If you do not have that particular PIN, you cannot take somebody's card and just slot it in and just use it for any financial transaction, right? That's not possible, because the issuer bank would vet that the PIN you are supplying for that particular card name doesn't match, right? So that's the responsibility of the issuer bank. That's the responsibility of the issuer bank. They vet that there is sufficient amount of money in your account for that particular transaction, and they also authenticate that the card belongs to that particular customer, right? Much importantly, the issuer bank is also responsible for customer service. For customer service. Now, there are times whereby the issuer bank has to do things like dispute resolution, and chargebacks. All of these are the sole responsibility of the issuer bank, right? You must have gone to a particular grocery store and you inserted your card to make a payment, and all of a sudden you were charged. Right? But the merchant POS did not receive the amount, right? They did not receive the payments, but you were charged. It is the responsibility of the issuer bank to do all of those customer attendance. You know, you'd have to collect the slip and go to the bank and make complaints, right? So it is the issuer bank that handles all of those nitty-gritty for customer service, resolution, chargebacks, and the like. So these are the responsibility of the issuer bank. Don't forget, in summary, the issuer bank is basically the customer's bank, right? So if you have a particular credit card, the bank that gave you that card is what we call the issuer bank. And they are responsible for, amongst many other things, 3 major important things. They are responsible for the authorization process, to be sure that you have sufficient amount of balance in your account. They are responsible for authenticating that the card belongs to you. And they are also responsible for customer service, for handling things like dispute resolution, chargebacks, and the likes. Let's have a look at the second institute, which is the acquirer bank. So we speak about the second bank, the second institution, which is called the acquirer bank. The acquirer bank is also known as the merchant bank. The merchant bank. Now, using our scenery as an example, right? This particular supermarket, right, is known as a merchant. This supermarket is known as a merchant because they are able to accept payments using all of these individual cards, right? So one of the importance of this acquirer bank, before I even get there, this supermarket is known as the merchant. Now, the merchant account sits with a particular bank, right? All of the money they are going to be collecting from their customers using this card transaction sits in a particular account. Now, that account sits within a particular bank, which is the merchant bank, right? I'm saying this merchant has an account information somewhere. So when they accept payment from this customer, that money goes into that particular account, and that particular fund resides within the merchant bank. And merchant bank, of course, is also what is called the acquirer bank, right? So the acquirer bank is basically the bank that holds the account information, the account details of the merchants. That's basically what it is. Now, one of the major importance of this acquirer bank is to sit as a middleman between the merchants and other credit card schemes, which is the last institution we're going to be talking about, the credit card networks. They can be called schemes, they can also be called the network. Now, this supermarket is able to accept any form of card. They are able to accept They are able to accept Visa card. This marker is not bright enough. They are able to accept Visa card. They are able to accept a MasterCard. They are able to accept a Verve card. But now note that this supermarket does not know any of these networks, which we're going to be talking about lastly. This supermarket does not know any of this network, but yet they are able to accept their products, their card, right? The reason why that is possible is because the acquirer bank, which is the bank of the merchants, sits in between this supermarket and this credit card scheme, right? So this acquirer bank, right, has abstracted everything that has to do with the communication between the credit card scheme and the bank itself. So the supermarket does not need to worry about how they are going to accept payment from this. As long as the merchant uses either the POS terminal or whatever terminal that the acquirer bank has given to it, the merchant doesn't need to worry how to accept all of this, right? So that's the major functionality of the acquirer bank. It sits as a middleman between the merchant and the credit card scheme, enabling the merchant to be able to accept all of the card of whichever credit card scheme or network that it supports. Yeah, that is basically the acquirer bank. Note the acquirer bank is the merchant's bank. That is where the account of the merchant bank sits, and it also acts as a middleman between the merchant and the credit card network. On the third note, we are going to be talking about the credit card network, which is also called the credit card schemes. So on the very last note, let's talk about the credit card networks. The credit card network. And the credit card network is also called the card schemes. Different card schemes. Alright, so these card schemes are basically the institution that connects the dots. Right, they sit in between the acquirer bank. They sit in between the acquirer bank and the issuer bank. They act as the middleman. Right? So they sit between the acquirer bank and the issuer bank. Alright, so basically, when there is a request to perform a particular transaction, the acquirer bank might not be able to speak directly to the issuer bank. Right? So the conversation goes via this channel from the acquirer bank to the credit scheme, to the credit card network, and down to the issuer bank, from the issuer bank down to the credit card network, and down to the acquirer bank. And that's how that flow of information goes for your transaction to be successful. And you imagine that all of this communication happen within split second. That's the beauty of technology. Now, the language they all speak and trying to communicate with one another is what we have constantly said to be ISO 8583. For these card schemes, there are various types of card scheme. They are actually divided into two. We have the open network. We have what we call the open network card schemes. And we also have what we call second, which is the closed network. I will explain what all of this network means. Open network scheme and closed network scheme. Right now, we have some particular card scheme that only acts as a credit card scheme. All right, they do not act as an issuer bank. Right, there are also some credit card scheme that doubles as a credit card network and also acts as an issuer bank. Right, so they are able to issue credit cards, they are able to issue debit card, and they are also able to act as the credit card network. Those type of network are called closed scheme. And the reason why they are called closed scheme is because they act as the credit card network, and they also act as the issuer bank. So their network is closed, and that is why they are called closed network. And there are a number of these. American Express is an example. American Express is an example. Discover is also an example. American Express and Discover is an example of a closed card scheme network, because they act as the credit card network and they also act as the issuer bank, right? Whilst we have the open network. The open network are credit card network that only solely act as a credit card network. They allow other banks to act as the issuer bank. They do not concern themselves with that. An example of this open network are the Visa, MasterCard. These are open network. I'm sure there are other examples, but these are the ones I can remember for now. Yeah, basically, so they are open network, and we have American Express, Discover, that acts as a credit card network and also an issuer bank. So let's just recap a little bit. The credit card network are basically the card schemes that are also called card schemes that sits in between the acquirer bank. Don't forget, the acquirer bank is the merchant's bank, and the issuer bank. The issuer bank is the customer bank, right? So when a customer tries to make a transaction, the acquirer bank, whose POS is used, tries to speak to the card scheme passing the information of the transaction, the PAN, your primary account number, and the amounts of the transaction, passes it to the card scheme. The card scheme routes that confirmation to the issuer bank, trying to confirm if the user has sufficient accounts, if the card belongs to the user, and if some extra charges should be added, say VAT or what have you. Once that issuer bank can authorize or authenticate that transaction is good to go, it goes back to the card scheme, and the card scheme sends that response to the acquirer bank, and the acquirer bank is able to bid that transaction as successful. All of this span of communication happens using a particular protocol called ISO 8583, and that's basically what ISO 8583 is. We're going to wrap it up for now. I think this is good enough for an introductory class. In the next section, we are going to be talking about the components of ISO 8583 messages. We're going to be looking at breaking the components into their various parts. We're going to be looking at the message type. We're going to be looking at the bitmaps. We're going to be looking at the data elements and the individual types of the data elements, what they correspond to, and how to actually fit them together and how to pass them over the network. All of these are things we're going to be looking at in the next class. If you're new to this channel and things like this interest you, software engineering in general, make sure to hit the subscribe button and click on the notification icon so that you can get notified when the next video come into play. Make sure you also like and subscribe. Make sure you also add your comment to the comment section. Let me know if you know more about this and if you'd like to see things like this more often. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you look forward to the next one. Have a nice one, guys. Cheers.